Hey there, STEM enthusiasts! Welcome back to Kameron's Lab, Dive In, the go-to podcast for STEM students, crafted with passion by one of your own. I'm Kameron, your enthusiastic and ever-curious host. Buckle up for today's insightful episode. Ready to dive in? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Kameron's Lab. Today, I am joined by Veronica Celis Vergara. She is the CEO at Valumia. And just to give you a little bit of an insight into her and why I'm really excited to have her today, I'll just give you a quick introduction. So one of the things is going to sound quite similar to her LinkedIn bio if you've seen it, but she is, like I said, the CEO at Valumia, MIT top innovator under 30. She's a TEDx speaker, a lead GA accredited architect, and she works in architecture and sustainable development. And she's a founder as well, which is pretty exciting. So, Vero, I'm super excited to have you. Thank you for joining me.
No, thank you so much for the invite. It's a true honor.
I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you is what really inspired you to pursue a career in architecture and sustainable development? Was there any early interests that maybe contributed to it?
I would say like the biggest driver for architecture was fear of boredom. I was actually like right before going to university, it's like 2 months before or so, I was planning on studying like dentistry because I was really good in science, and I'm good with people in general. And I thought, okay, this would be a good path. But then I realized that I would be doing the same my entire life, also hanging out with very little people. And for some reason, architecture popped into my head. And I thought that this idea of every project is going to be a new challenge. Every new challenge, I'm going to learn something new. So I will never be bored. And I will always meet new people. So that it's very naive, very, very naive.
I think it's similar almost to like how I kind of fell into what I want to do. So it's really like my grandpa kind of just showed me things, and then I realized that it was developing so quickly. I don't want to be left behind. So just this need to be not bored and be just doing something new all the time. So I love that. So very similar. Okay, so moving on to your academic journey. So I saw that you have a master's in landscape and territorial design. So I wanted to ask, like, why go for a master's? I think a lot of people stop at the bachelor's degree because they're thinking that's enough, which is true. It's up to you. But I'm really excited that you actually went further and wanted to pursue that master's. So what I guess inspired you to pursue a master's, and then how do you think that's affected your career path now?
So since I was very little, I always wanted to have a PhD, actually. So master's is like, the pre-path to the PhD, which I still don't have, by the way. I have a second master's, but no PhD. Like I really want a PhD, which hasn't really worked out, just yet. And the master's was kind of like the path to the PhD. Also, I, got part of a scholarship to do the PhD if I wanted to, the master if I wanted to do it. I like the topic. So I like this concept of working with something bigger than just like the object, which is like the architectural building, to think about more what that building would mean in a city, what that building, or if no building at all, like if, paths and zones, how they interact with nature. Thought this was really interesting. And I felt that I wanted to differentiate myself also, because there are so many architects in my country. And I thought, okay, I need that extra edge. So I want to keep studying. And I actually did my master's fully while being a full-time student. So full-time employee, sorry. So I was working at the same time of doing the master's, which was insane. I still don't know how I survived. But it was a very nice experience.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I could do that doing a job, but also master's at the same time. That sounds very stressful.
It was.
It does sound very stressful. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that you were still interested in science and technology before you went into architecture. So these days, how do you integrate tech with your architecture? And what future, I guess, do you see it going with? So that tech and architecture future, where do you see it going?
So I must say that, because like it is going to sound very weird to like the younger, people listening to this podcast, but like I was very lucky in the sense that I got very young computer. So dad is a tech obsessed person, I would say. So we got our first computer when I was 5 or 6. So I started, I was like using like Windows 3 point something and MS-DOS to figure out games like way before I knew before I knew how to read, which was crazy, and like this sparked like a bit of a curiosity. So I was always, or like very early on, like playing and exploring computers way before my peers. So I was always, I don't know, it was always easy for me to learn something new behind the screen. It still is, I would say, compared to my generation. I'm always finding that new software or that new piece of tech that is exciting and that I could integrate into my workflow. So I first started more or less as a user, bringing it to my workflow, like with 3D software, like sustainability analytics software as well. And then eventually I started creating tech as well.
And where do you see that going, I suppose, like for people that are like yourself and really enjoying bringing in new tools into their workflow? How do you see that, I guess, changing the way that, I guess, you do for architecture? I don't really have, like I said, too much of a background in architecture, but it sounds like very, I guess, technical, a lot of drawings that you would have to do. Do you think the technology will help with that at all, or how do you see it changing? If it does.
I think it's for sure a double-edged sword. So I went through the leap between AutoCAD, which was 2D drawings, and then the changes to 3D, like to building information modeling, which is like not just 3Ds, but 3Ds are intelligence, where the model has data in it. And what I saw in the beginning, because I was fortunate enough to learn AutoCAD and then to learn 3D software. And like the generation that came like right after me that just didn't skipped AutoCAD and learned just Revit, which was like the software that we were using at that time. And Revit at that time had a lot of problems because it could only deal with straight elements. It did curves really, really poorly. So even though like it is super useful, and it was super useful back then, it's way better now, so many years after. But I saw like how like the limitations of the tool also affected the capacity of design from those students, because they couldn't reproduce curves and things that sometimes maybe they had in their heads, but they just couldn't reproduce them in the software. So they just went back to what the software could do. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. And I see it now same with AI. There's a lot of AI software for architecture as well. A lot of things that you would normally consider boring that you can now try and test on with AI, which is great. But on the other hand, you lose that sense of, the feeling for things because you're not using them all the time. And I think that's a very, interesting challenge of our time. How the tools that we use limit the kind of creativity that we can have, and vice versa.
I like that. The tools that we use can sometimes limit that creativity. That's definitely a quote that I'll be writing down for later. But I think that that's lead into my next question, which was just, I wanted to ask you about your time. So I saw in your profile that you had taught lessons at the Universidad Diego Portales in Santiago, Chile. I wanted to ask you about what you noticed in terms of the next generation of architects. Like you mentioned already that they were limited sometimes by the technology, so they had to just defer to what it could do. But was there anything else that you noticed while teaching them, things that maybe they liked or didn't really want to try? This little high level, I suppose, of that experience.
So I had a very small experience as a professor, because I was a thesis advisor professor of a partnership that I co-created between my university and the company that I was working for at the time. It was a very, squared project, I would say, very defined by the limits of the project. So I didn't have a ton of students. So it was basically one big project that we're working on. But I'm fortunate enough to have still a lot of friends, and including my thesis advisor, who is still a professor in my university. So like he's basically like, 3 years ahead. And we talk about it then, like about how the generations are changing. And there's one thing about architecture in Chile, and I've noticed that it's Chile more than anywhere else. So architecture, when I was a student, was brutal. So you would go every Monday. Every Monday we had, like project day. Every Monday you would basically go to fail at university. You would go to be told that you're not good enough, that your project is stupid, and that you need to rethink the whole thing, which was, heartbreaking. But I would say I learned to not fall in love with my own work. And that I think is very important. I see like, the critiques have become a lot softer. They have become a lot more didactic too, like less personal, like, less offensive also. Cause like sometimes the comments were like, you're like, really? There's like one semester I went home crying every day. I would stand in class and I grabbed my bottle and I cried all the way back home, until I got home, then picked up myself and then went back to class, but it did taught me a lot of resilience because you have to show up, you have to keep showing up, and sometimes your project will suck, and like the comment from my professor is that the new generation, sure, they are nicer. They're a lot nicer. They're a lot more, like sometimes they're more constructive as well, but they don't know how to fail. Unlike, right, that we were failing miserably so often.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a lot of like learning by doing, almost like trial by fire. Having to go in there, see what happens, and if it doesn't work, you have to do it all over again. It sounds very stressful, very upsetting, heartbreaking.
Total trial by fire. You have no idea. Like it has like so no relationship of how much time you put in to the grade that you're gonna get. You could sometimes building a model for 24 hours straight. You go Monday, and then it's like, yeah, you got a 1, like the worst grade that you can probably get. Sometimes you'd be working like, more loosely, and maybe it took you 7 hours. So it was like nothing, and you get a 7. You're like, what? How? Like, how does this happen? Which is something that no other, like only the creative industries really have this, right? Like art, design, fashion, that where there's like no relationship. There's no correlation of how much time you spend on something and how good it goes. And like I see like how I saw like also like how brutal it was in comparison to our exchange students. Like we had students from all over the world. None of them cope with the level of demand that we had. They all failed.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's completely different for me. Like you said, I think that's something you can only experience in the creative industry. Because I do engineering. So as like the more work, at least because we're doing our senior projects, it's like the more, they always tell us the more work you put in, the better the grade you'll get. But it sounds like in the creative industry, it's like the more work you put in, it's like it's a coin toss. You don't know. You don't know what will happen.
You never know. Also, you may encounter a professor that is going through a bad time, and they will put worse grades than when they're they're going through a good time, because obviously they hate everything at that moment. So your project is no better.
Oh, what an experience. I guess I wanted to bring that into what it's like for you now. So you've transitioned from being a student, so going through that trial by fire, to now you're a CEO of Valumia, which I need to know if you could explain what that is, but also just if you can give a bit of experience. So what is Valumia? And then what is it like now being a female founder in architecture and sustainable development? So if you could share a little bit about that.
So I would say like I slightly walked a little to the side of architecture, like as a full-time thing. So I worked as an architect for about 6 years time, and then I've taken projects along the years, projects that I really want to do. but rest of my professional career has been almost fully in tech. So I did 7 years of my first startup, which also failed miserably after 7 years. So we did real-time transparency in the use of donations. It was called Enlighten. It was beautiful, but it didn't work, which was also, again, another learning of, you cannot fall in love with your work. You have to be able to let it go, which sometimes is very, very hard. So now I'm working on this new project. It's very, very recent. So Valumia is more in the lines of my sustainability specialization. I've worked in sustainability, which first started only in architecture, and then eventually it kind of expanded into human rights and a lot of other things in business in general, value chain, carbon analysis, vendor analysis, and all this beautiful thing that makes the life cycle of projects and businesses. So Valumia is this idea of a new platform that's specifically targeting startups and SMEs to help them do their sustainability reporting and sustainability compliance in a context of there's a lot more new regulation that is coming, especially to the European region, for companies that most of the times don't have the time, the resources, like financial resources, also the knowledge to deal with this regulation. So the concept is that companies create a user as a company, and then they answer 5 basic questions, which curates a list of disclosures that are relevant to them based on their size, their industry, their company goals, their geographic location, and their revenue. And that shows them like the disclosures as blocks and helps them fulfill each disclosure so they can share them with their stakeholders, investors, governments, you name it.
Wow. It all sounds very exciting and whoosh, it's a little bit too much business for me, but very exciting. Listening to the tech side of it, all really cool. If I could bring it back to what it's like for you being a female founder. So I think it's a little bit more, I think for me, at least for us as students, it's harder for us to meet women that are so successful in their career. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what it's like being a female founder.
I would say it's beautiful and infuriating altogether. So like founding as a woman is a challenge in terms of you don't have role models, or there are very little role models. There are little role models that you can call or that you can stalk on LinkedIn or something. That's hard. Funding is really hard. Like there's an intrinsic bias. VCs are very, in general, they're very conservative. Even if they like to think that they're innovative, they're quite conservative. And in my case, it's not only I'm a female, but also a migrant. So that is, it's kind of like 2 things that just one of the 2 is hard enough. Combining the 2 sometimes is insane.
I think that's something that, like, for example, for myself, I've also experienced it, just being like not just a woman in engineering, but then like a woman of color in engineering. It's like it's two different things. 100%.
Yeah.
What I wanted to transition into was MIT. So I mentioned at the beginning that you are an MIT top innovator under 35. So of course I want to ask you a little bit about what that means for you. How did that happen? Like, that sounds really exciting. Can we talk about it a bit more?
And so like the minute I got the mail, I spent like 30 minutes jumping up and down in my apartment. My husband thought that I was insane because I couldn't explain. Like I was crying and smiling and jumping up and down, and the dogs were like, what is going on with our human? We lost our human. Somebody call some sort of doctor because she's insane. Like we finally managed, like she cracked. She just cracked. Yeah, it's like, it's incredibly humbling, exciting. It's a huge, like, it's like the most incredible, we could say. And the other people are just so inspiring. I look at the other people. I'm like, dude, someone's going to find out that I don't belong here. Someone is going to find out that they made a mistake. Like they couldn't have chosen me, right? it's like this incredible, humbling experience. Only thing I have to say was a little bit anticlimactic because I got it during the pandemic. So it is the only generation that couldn't get together, which was very sad. It's the only generation of top innovators under 35 that does not know each other, which is just, like, we keep asking MIT to please bring this lost generation together because we really want to meet each other.
That's really sad. So you guys are the only ones that haven't yet met. So MIT, please, so we can get them all together. I think that'd be really nice for you guys.
We would be so happy, so incredibly happy, because like everybody has like this huge party, and they meet everybody and they get together, and it's like it's at MIT and it's so exciting. And we were like, we made a little call on Zoom.
Oh, no.
And we got a PDF with our, with our certificate, and it was like so sad.
Wow. Sad, but still super cool at the same time. It's like it's a paradox. It's still super cool at the same time.
Sometimes I see it and I still can't believe it. Like I'm like, what?
Wow. So leading on from MIT, so not only have you done, architecture degree, going into tech, and now, MIT top innovator, but you also have a lot of international experience. Like, for example, where I met you, it was in Munich. So it's like you have all this international experience. What advice would you give to students that are looking to get more international exposure?
I would say like endless curiosity help. And also saying yes sometimes to things that you're not so convinced that you want to do. Like I started my professional career when going to I did some other stuff before, but I went to Canada to work at a project with the company that I was working for, which was incredible. It was exactly what I needed at the right time. But when they offered it to me, I said no, because I had just got married. I was like married for like four months or something like that. And they offered it to me. And I said, I can't go. I just got married. Like I can't, and I called my husband and he says to me, if you don't go, you will never forgive yourself. You have to go. I wasn't convinced about going. I was scared. I wasn't convinced about the project either. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But like this little nudge, this little push helped me tremendously. I would have never done half of the things I've done so far in my professional career if it wasn't for that trip. If it wasn't for, I met my co-founder for my first startup in that trip. I also was for the first time on my own and not broke, which was lovely. I had like this beautiful thing of per diem. Please, somebody give me per diem back because that time was lovely. And it was just crazy. I got, so much more confidence in myself. I realized that if I spoke, people wanted to listen sometimes. That wasn't stupid, that I could do things. And also I learned that passion wasn't taken for granted. I thought that all people are passionate, like that you always try to do your best, but I realized that is not the case. So it was like, I don't know. So if you're saying no, I think that's like the biggest takeaway. If you're saying no for fear, fuck fear, just go, just take it. Even if you're not sure, just go anywhere. Even if the place doesn't sound so exciting. I've been also to places that where I worked for a while in one of the most disastrous mining facilities, in the world, actually, isolated. I was living on camp, but I learned so much. And that project also led me to other things. And people would take me seriously because I worked at that project. I was able to survive that project. So I would say, just, try to not listen to fear.
I love that. Thank you very much. And so my last question was going to be about, I think like what you said already was one of the challenges was just like learning to say yes to things and not I guess, limiting yourself for fear. Were there any other challenges that you might have faced, and how did you overcome them? Just as my last question for the day.
That could be like a whole hour. Yeah, I faced these challenges in my life. And, it sounds cheesy, but I would in a way, challenges have made me who I am. I faced my parents losing everything when I was still in university. That way, very naively, I learned that education is not a right. I became obsessed with education, with access to education, which led to my first startup. And even though it failed, my first startup led to, MIT top innovator under 35. It led me to a TEDx. It led me to grants. It led me to awards. It led me to go to Malta to meet rabbis that I had never, expected to meet before, because I'm Catholic by tradition. So even though it was I would say my parents' bankruptcy was the hardest time of my life, and then failing with my first job was the second toughest time of my life. Both of those have made me who I am, and have made me realize that I can get out of my own head, that I can stand again, that you can live with hunger. You can learn with hunger. You can be a student and not know if you're gonna have a place to live next month. But it's all somehow, if you have faith in yourself and you work hard, things kind of solve themselves. And eventually, when you look back, it's you know what, world? Thank you. I didn't know it at the time, but it was in a way the thing I needed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like a very difficult time, but it definitely has made you who you are now. So I'm glad that you're able to get through it all. And now here we are. So thank you again for sharing.
You're welcome.
So that's where I would like to finish our episode today. So thank you so much again, Veronica, for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. There were lots of advice. I hope you guys were writing it down. I know I was writing it down. Just taking all the notes that I could. Thank you again so much for your time. And have a great
You're welcome.
Hi again, awesome listener. That wraps up another deep dive of Kameron's Lab Dive In. Before you dive back into your day, see what I did there? Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Want a behind-the-scenes look? Bonus content? Or just some good old STEM fun? Follow me on my socials, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Kameron's Lab. And remember, every episode is a new adventure, and we've got some thrilling dives lined up for you. Don't miss out! Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.